Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Critters Attack. We're here to do, sadly enough, the very last, well, who knows, distant future, whichever, but this is the last Critters thing that I might review, unless they do something else. It feels kind of sad to just let this go, but because I've just watched so many of these things now. How did I feel about Critters Attacked? Well, I actually felt good about it. I felt at least better about this film compared to 3 and 4. To me, this kind of reminded me of Critters 2, but, story-wise, not as good as Critters 2. I felt like it was good enough. When really looking at it with just the garbage that was left in Critters 4 that I just recently seen, I'm like, man, this is a welcomed, just give me some of that story that seems just, kind of, not clearly good enough. You can't really invest in the main character that they focus on, who is Dre. You can't exactly focus on that character, but, I feel like the story is just good enough. That's all it needs to be, because all that matters is how many times critters are just gonna just nibble the crap out of things. That's all that matters in this movie. We just see several scenes where critters are just, licking the bones of several characters and killing them, and that's all that really matters in this movie, right? We bizarrely have to have some guy in the shower, because I guess we can't have a full frontal or anything of, we can't have any frontal or backal of or whatever in this movie of any woman. Here's the thing. Here's the one problem I have about this movie, because I do have a problem with it. The bounty hunter angle effing sucks. We have bizarrely a female critter, so we're to understand that female critters are to supposedly be different than male critters, but in Critters the New binge, they retcon that, I guess, to just, because there is a female critter in that group, and it's just a critter that has lipstick on, and it's to look like any normal critter, and I'm just like, okay, wait a minute, there was a female critter in this movie, but I guess she was kind of like a queen or something. Bizarrely, we have this white critter in this, that has to look drastically different than these things kinds of critters. And I was just like, okay, so, we're expanding the universe. I hate those kind of terms, but we're trying to do something drastically different, and I could appreciate it for that. But this kind of seemed like a lot like Gremlins. In all honesty, when you have the obvious different colored or critter. I almost said gremlin there. I pretty much did. I can't help it. It is what it is. So, going in here, Critters Attacked, how did I feel about this movie? I would say, compared to, the last two Critters movies that I saw, this one was definitely a thumbs up film. I would say that it's a good enough film is probably what I'd have to say. Probably a good, if not just good enough. It has that kind of wiggle room, because the bounty hunter thing bothers the crap out of me in this film, where we have a bounty hunter that ends up showing up in the last 5 minutes of this movie, if not less than that. So get ready to just get heavily disappointed in this just going back to being just this horror film that you're never to basically see a bounty hunter really in this film. But even when we do get a bounty hunter in this film, even that is just kind of saying that it's really flimsy, because we get a person coming back in this movie from the other things of franchise. But like she does nothing in this movie. She's just say that she's a bounty hunter, but man, is that just flimsy territory. But like at least she does something cool towards the end of this film. We could just say. Um, and we also have found out another critter's weakness, evidently, which actually now, when watching this movie, does make a lot of sense to Critters the New Binge. I was like, oh my god, so here's where they get the sound thing from Critters the New Binge. It's like, wow, like that's interesting. Like, man, that actually is like really clever that they went and like it also seems like they took the size thing from this movie and incorporated it in New Binge also, where like every one of these have like the big hand like size to them, pretty much, and none of them grow to like absurd sizes or like become this monstrous human, which I honestly just desperately wanted. Like I missed that from the very first Critters movie where you have like this human-sized critter. Like, man, would that have just been fun if they would have came back to that, but they didn't. Well, oh well. So, but we do get a Critters ball in this movie, so good enough, right? We go back to the ball, the Critters ball, the big, when all the critters combine into one ball and become this death rolling machine. So yeah, so we get that. Because, like, this has a lot of vibes of Critters too, but then again, like, these characters have such a crappy defense system in this movie. You would have thought, like, they would have, like, really escalated this thing to eventually having there be, like, hey, like, these people are just popping these things off with guns or whatever. No, it just comes to, like, hey, man, we just need to run away through a bulk of this film. So, with that said, let's go out of our way to say that we've seen this film and let's watch a lot of people die because that's all that really happens in this one. Let's go into spoilers about this movie, and more than likely, I'm not sure how heavily detailed this review is going to be about this film, but we're going to try our best. So, I think it's that coveted time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time you do spoil. Whoo! Hoo-hoo! This movie. So, we have a girl named Dre who is to go on to her work, and it seems like this girl is to be destitute to be working at this famous sushi shop for the rest of her life, because it seems that this girl is to not get into the one college that she wanted to go into, and now she has to, sadly enough, go and deliver this food to the place that she was to get into. And we have Dre, who is to have this one security guard at this Leroy college. And so this security guard weirdly had just become an instant friend with this girl. And evidently, this security guard loves to play the bagpipe, and so he ended up giving her a mixtape of his bagpipe music, where this girl's like, "Oh yeah, I kept the cassette because we still have cassettes of whenever this movie was. When was this? I don't know because it doesn't say. Probably it was still '90s, right? Early '90s, somewhere down the road there. Yeah, that still is probably cassette time. It probably more." No, yeah, that's still cassette because probably we don't get discs in until like 2000 ish, somewhere around there, 2000s, somewhere. Probably around my high school years, which was probably around 2000 ish. Whichever. Anyways, so pushing on. So, this girl goes and delivers her food, and then what ends up happening is uh, we supposedly have this girl's brother, who I think is Philip, who is to see these things flying into outer space because he's a guy with a telescope. And so he's like, yeah, I think I seen like these like spaceships. And his sister is just like, I'm sure it's probably just a plane. I think you're seeing things. But no, they're actually just two ships, separate ships this time around, not one, that end up dropping onto this Earth for whatever reason. So, I don't know, like the whole story of how these things get here, because there is no real bounty hunter story. We eventually just have Dee, who's Dee Wallace from the very first, like the first Critters, because yeah, like she's the mom from the very first Critters, because I guess like Bradley should have actually came back, but I guess he didn't. So the only one they could get to come back is this woman who only did the original Critters movie, and then the kid of that family did two of them, and then he left. And so like now I guess they're just like, hey, let's just scramble to just get like somebody from this franchise. And I guess the guy who played Charlie was just like, dude, I'm done. Like I'm just like I've made enough money off of this. I think I'm just done now. So Dee is to be this woman that has this like secret room of all these gadgets. And so this woman eventually is to go out into this forest and have this obvious like PKE meter knockoff thing that she's to go and scan to spot where these critters are. And we have Dee who is to find the ship, and she's like, oh, like, welcome to planet Earth, Your Highness, because there is to be a white female critter that is to make her way through this place that eventually Dre and Philip and some of his friends eventually go out in the forest to just kind of look around, and they easily find this female critter, but I can't really just say that it's a 100% only female critter because retconning and whatever. So for safety's sake, we'll just call whatever she ends up getting called in this movie. Like at first, I think they call her Snowball, and then they end up calling her like Angelica or something, or Angelina. I'm probably just gonna call her Snowball because I don't remember what exactly her name was, because who has time for these kinds of things? So we find out that Snowball has an injury on the side of her head, and so it seems what they end up doing is they and while this is going on, we have all of these critters going and tearing through a number of things. Like they take out the whole entire like ranger station. They kill every single one of those. They kill every ranger person. They kill random people that are just kind of making their way through places. I think they kill some YouTuber that is just kind of making his way through spots and whatever. So what happens is they go and have this female critter in this girl's backpack, and so they push on to try to see if there is a place, because I think at first they go to the ranger station, and of course every one of those are getting devoured by the critters, and the female critter can like sense that the male critters are devouring the this ranger station, but like we never actually see like the critters attacking these people. But eventually one of the critters kind of like pops up the blinds to just kind of like, I see you, Dre eventually goes to the veterinarian place to have this place be closed bizarrely for the day. And so like, well, I guess there's nothing we can do besides like go home and try to like help this animal ourselves. So they end up putting on some medication on the side of its head, and luckily, like, there was no upset thing going on with this thing, or luckily it didn't multiply or feed after midnight or whatever the heck things that critters roam into. Oh, um, the very first kill that the critters do and eventually grow into the size of this, man, was that kind of interesting. We have the critters that are just kind of like laying into this body and it's like, as they're like going and like eating away at this thing. Like they kind of like, it was a weird like body nest of a thing. It was just so like weird how all of a sudden you start to see this body moving around and you're like, what's that about? And all of a sudden you just see these like critters nesting inside this person's stomach. It's just like, wow, okay. And like we get to see like freaking losses of legs and stuff like that. We get to just see these critters just biting off what is left of some bone of somebody. I'm like, man, we're getting gory. We're getting back to gore. Thank God. Like, at least something, right? So, at least somebody's like nibbling off of some person, like really taking a huge bite out of them. Thank God. At least it's not just like a ROM kind of situation where it's like grabbing of some kind of like body part and then it's obvious that like they just never let go and then like that's all the attack is. Like at least you actually see them like viciously consuming something in this movie, which bravo to any of the people doing this movie for all the stuff that they did, the complex stuff that they did for this movie. Bravo to them. Like, yeah, the story is what it is, but nah. So, what eventually ends up happening is that one of the critters are to eventually go and tear its way through the trunk of this car to eventually follow these people. And so eventually Philip is to eventually notice uh, that one of the critters is in the trunk. Which is like, okay. So, what they end up deciding to try to do is like, man, we gotta freaking take this to somebody. Like, we gotta be able to just, like, tell people, like, what we got here, because this is something weird. So, everyone goes into the car, drives off, and so all of a sudden, supposedly there is a critter that is to be like I think underneath the car or something weird. So they drive off, and so eventually the first queuing up thing is to go to the sheriff, which is actually a relative of Dre. I think it's her uncle or something along those. Yeah, I think it's his uncle, her uncle. We find out also that Dre's mother is to have been killed, I guess, in some kind of car accident. Uh, it also seems that Dre, when she was to go and take that mail into that college, we have Dre who is to meet this jock guy named Gregory Sachs and coincidentally meet up with her best friend called Mandy. And so, like, Mandy and Dre are just kind of like, they're having these, like, horrible moments with one another where eventually, like, Dre is going to call her the B word. Eventually, when, like, Dre is to tell, like, of what's going on in this town and whatever, and they don't really believe her. Because eventually, Dre and them all head to the college because they think, like, well, hey, like, this is probably the most secure place, right? Probably. So, because eventually, once they go through the town, freaking everyone ends up dead, or, like, you can just tell, like, there's this onslaught going on in town. And that, of course, is when, like, Dee is also making her way through the town and just be like, yeah, critters taking over. Like, we don't have her just going like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of critters all in this one spot. Maybe I should just bust out my gun and just start randomly firing away. No, like she's just like, yeah, critters, sure. Like, what the is that? So, anyways, we also eventually find out that the male critters are to eventually sense the female critter, and hence why like we start getting these critters following Dre and them. Because what ends up happening is Dre is to eventually make it to her uncle, who's the sheriff, and he obviously ends up freaking getting decked by these critters. Like he ends up getting like some chunks taken out of him, spikes are all over his bate, and so Dre has one last moment with her uncle, and her uncle's like, "Hey, like I was supposedly going to get you that night, and not your mother, and so it could have been me instead of your mother who died that night." And Dre is like, "Oh, but Uncle, shut up, because you're gonna die anyways, viciously and awful." So, pushing on, so Dre is to eventually go to her boss's restaurante, and so now Dre is to explain everything to her boss, and he's just like, okay, like, I guess I should just buy into all of this, right? Like, yeah, I guess. So, all of a sudden, the critters are to show up at this restaurant, and so now we have this, like, this owner of this restaurant who now has these, like, really sharp knives, and he's freaking chopping these critters in half. Kind of looked cool. Kind of was a cool spot there. But eventually, that just leads to Dre and everybody going into this van to try to make their way to this college. And what they tried to do was they tried to find Sean, who was the security guard. There's the name. Because he said, "I'll be right back." And yeah, he wasn't going to be back anytime soon. Because Dre is to eventually go and find where Sean is because she follows the bagpipe songs to find out that Sean isn't exactly playing the bagpipes anytime soon. That actually the critter is chewing through Sean, which is chewing through the bagpipe, which is playing the bagpipe, and Dre ends up finding Sean bagpiped out. But hilariously enough, like the critter is a much more better bagpipe player than Sean was, which was kind of sad. Like it's like, hey man, like that bagpipe and like man, whatever he's doing sounds great, but that's because he's freaking dead. So queuing up, Dre makes it to the collage, and Mandy is to open the door. And so Mandy, why am I saying Mandy? Dre. Uh, Dre is to tell Mandy about what's going on. And Mandy's just like, dude, did you like lose your mind? Like, I don't believe you. Like, because Dre doesn't exactly explain everything. And uh, Gregory, the jock guy, eventually he's just like, well, hey man, I'm gonna go and like run and like get back in like a minute or two with the keys that Sean had. Like, believe me, I'll go and get the keys. I'm like, what are you gonna do, freaking jock guy who has to throw off his shirt because I guess he worked out so severely hard to look good in this movie? So this jock guy is just running around in a pair of jeans and sneakers, and he's just like, "Hey man, I'll get him. Like I'll save the day. Me just running around will just save the day for everybody." And so this guy is to run off, and all of a sudden he's to run in one direction, and then he's like, "Whoa!" And then he starts running into another direction because all of a sudden we have Critter's ball coming at Gregory, and we just see Gregory, of course, in a very classic manner, has to trip and has to fall because anybody who's like a marathon runner or a whatever, anybody who can run perfectly into the night always has to trip on a banana peel every single time in a horror movie. Everyone has to trip, and then frickin' somebody has to die. That's always what happens. So they end up watching on as Gregory is a trip and get run over by the critter ball. And so they're like, oh my god, like these things, they're just gonna kill everybody. Everyone's gonna die at this point. That's what everyone's thinking. So eventually they decide, you know what, F it with this whole, like we might as well make a stand, but we might as well make a stand in a really good spot. Oh, before the sheriff was to die, because the sheriff was kind of just driving around, just woo with his siren, and he realized that eventually the sirens were killing the critters, that their freaking heads just blew up because of the sound, and so and like the sheriff was trying to hit his like siren thing multiple times to try to get these critter things to blow up. And so he's like, yeah, like I figured out the weakness. But then he like drove off and he was like, yeah, I think I got away from him. All of a sudden there's a critter in like the back quasi seat of this guy's vehicle, obviously assuming that this guy is going to die. So we push on. So Trey is to eventually go into this like shed by this football field and with her cluster of friends. And so they decide that, like, you know what, like we should make our last stand. Like we should go and just get all these wild, goofy, like weapons, like a shovel and a rake and all kinds of stuff, like a pitchfork and whatever, and just decide, you know what, this, like, we gotta do this. Like, we have to just fight these things off. And so that's eventually when we have Dee, the bounty hunter, that's been doing nothing this whole entire movie besides just doing these little scenes here and there that I just don't understand the connection of any of these. Like, what is she doing? What is she doing? What? What? So Bounty Hunter Dee is to eventually go and make her way to the female critter, because the critter is in this one building where she's going to decide to also do her last stand, to all of a sudden have her eyes turn red and her like have like her attack ability to go, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to take all you critters out, because I guess supposedly this female critter was going to be the Earth's last stand, which I'm like, then why did she only bring one of them? I don't know. Anyways, so D is to help female critter, and female critter is also to help out like D, and so now we have D and female critter teaming it up. So if we've always had a bounty hunter critters thing where it's always like versus, this bizarrely has this kind of united front for whatever reason, but hey, story. So what ends up happening is that like Dre is to come out with this little freaking horn thinger that has to bizarrely get like shaped like a spray can, and so this girl goes out there is like, and she like lays on this thing, and I'm just like, man, like if we haven't had horrible enough sounds with the bagpipe music, now we have this kind of going throughout this thing, like freaking, it's like Dumb and Dumber. It's like, hey, do you want to hear the most annoyingest sound in the world? Like freaking that in this movie. Good God. So we have the girl going through all these critters, and their heads are exploding. But of course, when we finally have Dre getting to the one freaking critter with this like one scratched out eye, because I guess like this critter was supposed to be the one who killed her sheriff uncle, whatever. The spray can horn thing loses juice, and so the critter is just like, ha ha ha, suck it. Like, you can't get me. So maybe they should have gone with bleach. Maybe they should have figured out it was bleach that was going to be their weakness, but I guess they didn't figure out in this film. Also, when they end up taking weirdly the one ranger out who's taking a shower in this movie for whatever freaking reason, it's a male guy that really I was just like I just want to see this guy dead. And luckily he was bizarrely like grabbing for like the loofah or whatever, and he ended up grabbing a critter instead. And once like this guy was just like pushing this critter thing with his face while he was showering, and then the critter grabbed him and killed him. I was like, yeah. But then we also get that spot again where we have the one critter that's like eating the soap or the shampoo, and he's like shooting out bubbles out of his mouth. I'm like, dude, we did that in Critters 3. Come on. Like, don't double down on the bubbles. Come on. I know it's a fun little effect, but come on, man. Critters with bubbles, you know? Come on. That was so Critters 3. Don't go back to that well. It's fun. Anyways, so I don't know why I did talk about that scene. That scene is just like, ugh. Anyways, so Dre is to eventually decide to make her last stand, and so they decided like, hey, like all the kids are like, yeah, we're gonna go and get him. We're gonna go and take him down. Because all these critters are just appearing. They're rolling their balls all the way over here to come on down to be the next contestants on. You're going to be hit with some weird freaking crap. So they have like shovels and rakes and pitchforks. One guy is like consistently just kicking these things as if that freaking matters. So we have these kids that are trying to defend themselves, but eventually the critters end up like shooting out these needles. Like, we have, like, the Phillips kid who ends up getting hit in the neck, and, like, he stays with the needle in his neck for the rest of the movie. We had the one girl who also, I think, ends up getting, like, hit in the freaking arm, and she ends up going down. One critter tries to, like, bite her leg, and so Dre eventually takes the needle from her arm and stabs the one critter in the eye. But it doesn't exactly kill that critter. It just, like, you thought it would, but then gets right back up. It's like, ah. So, that's when all of a sudden, finally, after too much time in this movie, we have Dee who's going ahead and just shooting some of these, like, some of these critters and like, hey, I'm a bounty hunter that's on Earth. Like, great for us, right? Because I think you guys ran out of all the other bounty hunters. Frickin' Charlie's in year 2040, so, like, basically all the critters or all the bounty hunter guys are probably dead at this point, right? I think. So, they ran out of bounty hunters in this movie. So, we just have Dee who ends up chucking Dre, like, this gun. It's like, oh, here's this futuristic gun that you probably won't be able to know what to do with. And so, what eventually ends up pushing on for them to do is just find the last bit of critters that are basically just all connected into this one ball. And so now we have this, like, Tremors moment that happens, like, for every one of these films, where we have to have this huge, like, smack of goop that ends up hitting people as they go and hit this huge monsterish ball of a critters thing. And so, like, we have Dre and we have Dee who are just kind of like getting ready with their guns like this is some Men in Black moment. And Dre is telling like Phillips to help her like try to like aim the weapon. Dude, they're only gonna get one shot at this. I guess Philip just needs something to do. So, hey, just help aim. So they fire off one whole shot, and there we get this huge slime of goop hitting these people. And then they're just like, well, I guess that's it. And that's how the movie just freaking ends. Like, they do the big, like, shoot out of this thing, and then they just call the movie done. They wrap it up. I'm like, you couldn't have had a happy ending. Maybe there was an end credit scene. I don't know. I didn't pay attention because I didn't care. Um, Maybe there was a whole thing where D just like goes back with the critters to the female critter to wherever she's from. I don't know. But yeah, like what was like eh. Anyways, like I hated like the ending that just ends. Like I hate those kinds of movies that it just ends because it's like, well, I guess we just did the big huge event thing, freaking kill it. Like so like it didn't say that this girl eventually went to college or whatever. Like we have the moment where Mandy is mentioning it's like, well, hey, like you know what, if you go and you get this one kind of job and you probably do that for like 30 years, you'll probably eventually have enough money to get together to probably go to this college. And Dre is like, oh, thanks, Mandy, you're still a bit. like 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 it just seems like this girl has to work extremely hard to go like either way to just go to this college. But like Manny kind of like softens it up by saying like, but yeah, but you'll have a lot of friends and you'll like, because I'm sure like once everyone finds out that you are the savior of planet Earth, like man, are you just gonna like everyone's gonna be your friend after this, whoever is freaking alive. But yeah, like so I think that's all I wanted to say about Critters Attack. Uh, Obviously, this movie should have been called Critters Attacks, but to each their own. Anyways, I found this movie to just be fun. Like fun in the fact that at least this like was seemingly better than some other ones. Like there was a lot more critters in this movie. There was a lot more like reminiscent of Critters 2 kind of. Like it really just showed that like if Critters 3 and 4 didn't have a budget, like this movie uh like seemed to make up for those two failures, I guess. But like hey, like freaking movies are hard to do. Freaking shows are hard to do. Freaking YouTube channels are hard to do because a lot of people will just say, "Hey man, like we freaking just ran out of funds for this one project." And so, man, if you guys just have $100,000 just lying around, or hey, if you guys just have a ton of money lying around, like if somebody ever wanted to do like certain kind of shows and bring them back to life, hey, if anybody has like a couple $1 million just lying around, like I'm just like, God, just the astronomical like how could you just have like how could you just say if you guys just have $100,000 or a couple $1 million just lying around, who would just have that kind of money lying around? Like it must have been just a person that just like freaking just hit it big somewhere. But anyways, I'm gonna hit myself big by getting out of here. uh Thank you everyone for ever watching any of these critters videos. I know freaking listening to me might be a Herculean task, but thank you everyone for being a part of this. I guess it was lucky for me to be able to review this because technically I've had some kind of just like brain farts lately, and like it was nice to not be able to have to double over what I just said. Like it's just like, God, could I just please talk through this video? Because I had several problems through a lot of other videos to just try to just talk. Because my brain was just in a fog. Or is just in like a place of just like, I couldn't talk. So luckily we got through this one. Thank you. Whatever you guys do after this, if you guys like this one and want certain other things, let me know. I'll try to get to them as best as I can. But I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.